My name is Hannah Awanaga. I'm the founder and CEO of Illume Executive Consulting, an organization focused across three core disciplines: cultural governance, inclusive practices, and leadership authority. I'm so excited to be with you here. I know some of you that have been following our lives knows that I say that every single month, but I really enjoy these conversations, particularly with the Illume faculty, because we have such a great amount of experience across the faculty. So it's always good to speak to one of them. And so today we are talking about leadership, ownership, and accountability. Inclusive leadership for many people as we describe how we want our leaders to really think about inclusion. So for a long time, we have been focused on how do we really try to drive inclusive leadership across our organizations? And is it a given that you are an inclusive leader just because you're a leader? Often people focus on behaviors, but what we want to explore today is ownership and accountability. So I am joined by the amazing Grace Masuro. Grace, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
No worries at all. I'm really, really excited to have this conversation with you. And I know we've had several conversations about leadership and inclusive leadership. So hopefully we can share our perspective today. So Grace is an inclusion and culture consultant and has multiple years, Grace, of supporting leadership and organizations with culture and inclusion. And so I'm really, really excited to be getting into this with you, Grace, because I know you have a wealth of experience. So the first question I have, and it was one that I was pondering on, is when we talk about inclusion, or when we say that inclusion is everyone's responsibility, I get the premise, but I think that when the responsibility is left to everyone, it's actually left to no one. And so I'd love your perspective on that. You know, when we say inclusion is everyone's role, what does that mean, and how is that quite conflicting sometimes?
Yeah, so I do say something similar. I think every single one of us has the power to be the change we want to see, right? So we get to influence how people experience work and how included they feel. But I think the challenge that we have is sometimes we're seeing organizations say, well, it's everyone's responsibility without giving anyone the power to actually influence what inclusion looks and feels like in their organization. And if you're told that you have the power to do this, if you don't have if you're told that you own this, so like inclusion is your responsibility, you influence what it looks like, but you're not actually given the power to do that. You don't have a budget, you aren't in the rooms where the conversations are being had, and you ultimately can't challenge things that don't feel like inclusion, then actually you're just being exposed. You're basically being put forward as the face for inclusion without the power to influence what it genuinely looks like and feels like in the organization. And then when people feel marginalized or feel like, actually, you know, I'm not seen or heard here, you're then the one that gets the blame because everyone's been told you're the head of, you're the director of, but you don't actually necessarily have all of the tools that you need to really impact what it looks and feels like in organizations. So I love the premise. I just think we need to do more to make sure that we're actually giving key individuals within organizations the genuine power to influence what that looks like.
I completely agree. And I think it's very easy to say that there's an ownership. It's very easy for leaders to say that they own inclusion and they want to drive it. And sometimes we see that activity then falls to awareness and visibility without actually driving change. And so from my perspective, I think that yes, absolutely, you know, a lot of these people say we want to drive inclusion, we own it, we really believe in it, but then to your point, are not given the resources, the time, or the kind of expertise that you need to really drive it. So yeah, I agree. I think even when we say inclusion is for everyone, there needs to be somebody, someone championing it, someone who owns it, someone who's holding people accountable to it, so that actually we can see the change.
I think the other thing that I'd add as well is when you look at organizations that have, various departments, if they're organizations that do business with other businesses, traditionally you will see in every single person's KPI, or their one-to-one PDP, PDR document, you will see a KPI that's built in around how they support the organization to achieve its financial targets. So if we're saying that inclusion is everyone's responsibility, are we building those types of KPIs into everyone's one-to-ones and performance reviews and KPIs generally to say, well, actually, what have you done this month to further inclusion in your organization? Or how have you committed to being anti-racist in your sphere of influence? Are we seeing that? And if we're not, I think that's something organizations need to think about doing, to take that premise of inclusion is everyone's responsibility just one step further to a point where it actually can impact change or affect change.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that leads me on to kind of my second question, which is, I know that you've worked with executive teams for years now, and there's a lot. When we talk about culture, it's not just about inclusion. Culture is about the look and feel of the organization. Where do you see the biggest disconnect from leadership who are ambitious and want to do stuff to people who are just saying they want to do stuff and obviously not, the actions are not showing? What disconnect are you seeing?
Yeah, so there's definitely a disconnect. I think one of the things that I love seeing is most of the execs and CEOs that I speak to about inclusion get really excited when they think about what they're trying to create and what they want their organization to look and feel like. And they also get really excited because they believe the work is being done on the ground. They're doing the engagement surveys and they're all saying, fairly reasonable good things, like they're making progress. Their diversity stats are there showing they've got good representation in the organization, not necessarily further up the ranking, but in the organization they're seeing diversity. So for them, they're really excited thinking, we're doing this. But the gap, or what I'm constantly having to communicate with them is, how often are you actually on the ground speaking to your people? Because what you traditionally find, and what I always say to people, is you actually need to engage the people you hear very little from. So the people that aren't filling out the surveys, the people that aren't speaking up at town halls, the people that aren't commenting in meetings, because they are usually the ones that are disengaged or resigned to, what their lived experience is in the organization in every single day.
And then when you do surveys, or when you do engagement surveys, or when you're trying to collect data, you wonder why you're not getting the response rate that you need. It's because obviously there are people in the organization who don't feel connected to the cause or the mission or the values. And actually, I think we look, and I've done it, and I'm sure you've done it, where you've looked at the data, and the data tells you that there's a large percentage of people that say prefer not to say. And actually, when you look into that data, the reason often is that as an organization, you haven't really talked to the business about why you want to collect that data. You have to build trust. I don't know about you, but I think there's something really important about, rather than going straight to collecting data, how do you build trust first?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I believe when it comes to these surveys, I think what's really important is, and I always try to get my clients to think about this, and they talk about it a lot, which is a good thing because it means they're aware, but stop asking people to tell you about their trauma and the burden that they carry if you're then not going to do anything about it or do anything with what they tell you. And you tend to find that trust is broken, or people start to disengage from these surveys and efforts to engage them when they feel like they're constantly, taking the time to relive some really tricky things that they've experienced in the organization, but they're not seeing any change, or they're not seeing any direct action as a result of that engagement. And I think the other thing that, in terms of the disconnect, I think that many executives walk around their organizations believing they have an open door policy and saying it, and like saying hi to everyone, being in the kitchen, making coffees with the team and thinking, we're on a level. But actually, that's not the case. You're usually the last person or people that individuals in your organization are going to go to if they feel like there's an issue with the culture, because who wants to bring bad news to an exec, particularly someone in the exec that they thinks that everything is okay. The other challenge that you have is most of the execs that I know, if you bring an issue, they want you to also bring a solution.
Yeah.
But when there's an issue with inclusion, too many people are afraid to make mistakes. So they don't often think about actually what are the solutions to these issues. And therefore, if I don't have a solution, I can't have that conversation.
Yeah,
so people shy away from that.
And you know what? That in itself is really hard, because in a business sense, absolutely, come with a problem and the solution. With inclusion, sometimes I think that can be challenging, because we ethnically diverse people, women, LGBT people that have diverse abilities, we see the problems. But actually, is it up to us? Is it up to us to bring the solution? I think sometimes when it comes to inclusion, in every other sense, it's like, yeah, come with the solution. But with inclusion, I think there should be an ownership from the organizations to do more, to come with the solution themselves, because that's what we've seen. And the question that I was going to come on to was about lived experience, right? So a lot of our leadership don't have the lived experience on the ground. They don't have the lived experience of people across their business. And so for the last few years, from an allyship perspective, we've been championing that. Ask people, have meetings, go to events. I think, and I'd love to hear your perspective, over the last few years, we've lent into that too much. And actually now people see that as being inclusive, as an inclusive leader. And I just don't know if that visibility is enough to say that you're an inclusive leader, where actually I think there's some deeper work that needs to happen. I don't know if that resonates.
Yeah, it does. I think so. I hear what you're saying about, like, we can't expect people that are victims of a system to carry the burden of fixing it. And I don't actually think we have the power to fix it. But what I do think is still really important is that the exec, senior leaders, managers are having those conversations with their employees on the ground who have lived experience, so that they can understand what it feels like to walk the world and, to kind of progress in an organization being who they are, right, with the identities that they have. I do think it's also important to ask, actually, what would move the needle for you on this? What would make you feel like we are actually doing more and doing better? And then looking at, okay, where is the exec sponsorship? Who is holding accountability for doing this in, the exec team and SLT and the C-suite, etc., and holding those people to account. And I think that's the piece that's missing is, when you go to these town halls and you say, come with pre-prepared questions, submit your questions early, feel free to ask questions during the session. If people are then asking questions and you're answering, giving them really positive, like, encouragement and commitments, and then nothing is done afterwards, I think it's where it gets tricky. And I actually invite members of the C-suite that go to speak at their town halls, that then make those verbal commitments, is to actually hold themselves to account, to say in those town halls, the next time I stand in front of you, this is what I will have done. And actually saying that out loud makes you have to do it, because there's too many people that heard you say you were going to, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I'd really encourage.
And I think that's such an important point, right? That leadership accountability, and actually visibly and openly talking about what you are going to do. That definitely drives the behavior of, okay, I've said it now, so I've got to do it. I also love what you said about this idea that, absolutely, people from diverse backgrounds should not be solving your inclusion problems, but there should be a collaboration with it. And I agree. And actually the work that we do at Illume is very much about leadership. It's about positioning leadership from a culture perspective. It's about helping leadership understand accountability. But then more and more, what we're also finding is that organizations are wanting that two-pronged approach. They want you to do stuff with their leadership, but they also want you to support them with the rest of the business. And we've really enjoyed doing that, because what that means is we can set the leaders up for success, but also position the rest of the business to come on the journey with them. And one group that I would say, in my experience, really kind of has a real challenge with this is the ERG groups. Now, everyone knows that everyone knows Nobody might know, or some people might know, that I led the ERGs at Barclays whilst I was there, and one of the strategic oversight. And one of the things I saw from the co-chairs every single time was that they were passionate, they were energetic, but they didn't have the ecosystem around them to do what they wanted to do. And one thing to say, we're an ERG co-chair, we're for, you know, the women's group, or we're for the LGBT group, or for the social mobility group. If there's no support there, if there's no structure there, they can easily and quite quickly feel deflated, because, to your point, if the business isn't matching their energy, if the business isn't supporting them, providing them with the resources, helping them get to a strategy, then they can feel like the work that they're doing isn't actually moving the dial. I wonder, you know, I suppose my question to you is, a lot of ERGs, if you don't have a sponsor, you should have an executive sponsor. A lot of ERGs do have that leadership sponsorship. What's your thoughts on this whole idea that ERGs are supposed to drive change in your business, and the role of that sponsor from an inclusive perspective?
So I think it's important to think about why people traditionally join ERGs. So in my work, I've spoken to many kind of young professionals from various backgrounds, that, you know, from Black and global majority communities, neurodiverse individuals, women, people from the LGBTQIA plus community. And each and every single one of them, when they join an organization and they get approached to join an ERG, or they find out about an ERG, they usually go because they want a safe space. They feel like, actually, this is a space for me to meet people that are like me, that have worked in this organization for a while, that can give me tips and support around how I navigate this organization as the person that I am. That's traditionally why people join ERGs. People that are leading ERGs have usually been in those groups for a while and now think, you know, I've done the whole safe space thing. I now want to see some change and I want to influence that. So I want to become a leader and I want to do that. The problem is that I don't think enough organizations that create ERGs and sponsor ERGs understand that initial reason why people join. So then placing this expectation that, you know what, we've got these great ERGs, these, you know, they speak for the different communities in our organization, you know, let's make them responsible for doing this, or let's make them responsible for doing this. It's actually, have you spent the time to understand who is in those ERGs and what are the reasons they join those ERGs? And are you creating support systems to meet each of the needs that they identify as having, that are the reasons that they join the group? I think the other thing as well is many ERG meetings traditionally will involve people that have had, you know, uncomfortable conversations or situations in their organization that they've come to share in their safe space. And then as a team and as a group, they'll all discuss that and potentially suggest ways that they can approach handling that situation going forward, etc. And they may also say, you know, I'm going to speak to the sponsor about this. We're going to get some change done. But traditionally, what can happen is you have sponsors who have these beautiful, you know, ideas, and they really want to affect change, which is why, well, some of them have decided to be sponsors. Some of them have had the ERGs thrown at them. I'm just going to be honest. They've been like, you need to sponsor an ERG. Here, you can do this one, because they don't have a sponsor. So I think we need to really think about, actually, are our sponsors genuinely bought into the ERGs that they support? Have they been to any of the meetings? Do they understand why people come to those meetings and what takes place in them? And are they cognizant of the responsibility that being a sponsor requires? What is it actually requiring of me, right?
Yeah, that's it, exactly. Do they even know? Like, it was so interesting over the years looking at the evolution of ERGs across Barclays, and even in other organizations that I've worked for, where, like you said, right, really passionate, really energetic, you know, want a safe space. Now, don't get me wrong, I never want to take away from that importance of having a safe space. It is critical. I think over the years, what I've observed is that when it stays there, when it stays in a space of this is a safe space, the expectation from the ERGs grows. It's like, well, we've been going for a year now. What change have we seen? But the support to help them drive change is not there.
Mm-hmm.
And so actually what you need is absolutely you need a safe space, but you also need to create a system, a strategy that you can go to your leadership with. And so that's the role of that. From my perspective, that is the role of a sponsor. A sponsor is the in-between, the go-between between you and the business. Yeah. And what I've seen is that ERGs are not using their sponsors in the right way. They're using them, to your point, they are using them for, come to my meeting, and all them things are important. But what is the sponsor doing when you're not in the room? What is the sponsor doing when he's at the boardroom? And that's the missing, for me, I think that's the missing link. That's what we talk, at Illume, that's what we talk to our clients about, is actually how are you connecting the sponsorship authority, if you like, their power, their privilege, whatever they have, how are we leveraging that for the ERGs? Because I don't know about you, but I speak to a lot of ERG members now who are so passionate, but also tired, like really exhausted, really kind of feeling a bit deflated, not seeing action. I don't know.
No, absolutely. I think for me, what I'd like to see is every single ERG structure that exists in organizations has in effect its own org chart of, these are the responsibilities that sit within this, and these are the roles that they play, and this is the impact they have, with clear details around the responsibilities of the sponsor, so that when people are being asked to be sponsors, they actually know what that responsibility is going to require of them, and they can make an informed decision. Because I think all too often, in the same way where we have, many people that became managers because they were really great at their initial day job, right? And they said, you're really great, we want to keep you, we're going to give you a promotion, but they didn't get the training that they needed to thrive as managers. And I think similarly, when we're asking people to be sponsors, how are we equipping them with the tools they need to be effective sponsors in those spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the role of business. I think that's the role of the business. I think that's the role of a strategy, right? I think it needs to, often there's a disconnect because the ERGs are doing something, sponsors want to support them, but there's no strategy that is connected to the work that they're doing. So it doesn't feel connected in that way. So look, I would love, just from a final couple of questions around, just if someone was listening today and they are a leader and they're questioning whether they are an inclusive leader, in your perspective, Grace, what is an inclusive leader? Like, how can people actually start to drive that?
I think that, are you an inclusive leader in terms of how you measure that, or how you decide or come to the acknowledgement that you are or you are not? I think it's based on, how do your people show up each and every single day? Do they come to you, or do they feel safe enough challenging you when they don't agree with something that's being done? Do you see yourself equally progressing people from all backgrounds in your team and supporting their development? How much time do you spend with people from different backgrounds? I think those are really good indicators of how inclusive you are. But I think ultimately, one thing that I'm cognizant of is inclusion doesn't collapse because people stop caring. It collapsed because it was never built into anything that had to hold. And I think the main thing for organizations to really start to think about is actually, does your inclusion work have any load-bearing structure underneath it, or is it standing on sentiment? So is there a structure? Is there accountability? Is it being measured? And if not, then you've just got a really beautiful idea and you've got, kind of great intentions, but you're not going to see results. So I'd invite organizations to start with one system. So that could be hiring, it could be promotion, or it could be how you handle grievances, and make it the proof point in your organization. So, if we're looking at hiring, what are the things that we're going to really focus on to evidence that we are making progression in inclusion, and really just focus on that for 6 to 12 months and see where the proof point is for you, and then move on to others. But I think all of that will really support doing this work in an intentional and measured way that feels genuine and feels like it's creating structural change, which is really what we need to start seeing.
Yeah, and I agree completely that actually from my perspective as well, I think that just the same way that leaders, when we think about business strategy or business growth, when we think about market demographics, when we think about how we're going to grow a business, we set a strategy and we make sure that everyone understands that strategy. I think it's the same with inclusive leadership. I don't think it's something that you are born with, or I think actually you can learn it. I think that everyone has got biases. Everyone is inherently biased. We know that. And so it's not a given that you're an inclusive leader. And so I think, again, when I think about leaders and their roles and actually the impact that they can have, when I think about the impact that they have around hiring, developing, promotion, succession planning, like actually from what you're saying around how do we make it systemic, it's across all of that. We even see it in some organizations with work allocation. Who's getting the work? Who's getting sponsored? Who is getting promoted? Who is getting notice? What work is being amplified? Whose voices are being amplified? Like, I think when we move away from surface level inclusion, as in, I'm going to support an ERG, I'm going to go to an event, I'm going to mentor somebody, and go really deep into how do the decisions that I make impact the wider business, that's when you start to see change, isn't it? And when you start to link it to actions, outputs, decisions, what you then find is that you might not actually be as inclusive as you think, because you're thinking about inclusion as a very kind of top level, where inclusion really happens in the nitty gritty. It really happens in the kind of day-to-day decisions that for years and years you've just overlooked. You get a piece of work on your desk and you give it to John because you always give it to John. Actually, inclusive leadership is like, right, well, who hasn't had a stretch opportunity recently? Who do I want to see more of? Who is it that I think is got potential but is hiding behind their work? That's, conscious inclusion. I don't know if you call it a different word, but this idea of being conscious about the decisions that you make, rather than thinking that I'm going to do inclusion today, or I'm going to do inclusion in October or in March, but actually every single opportunity that you get is the intentional leadership, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. I always challenge people and say you don't park compliance and health and safety to 6 months later. You're thinking about those things every single day. And when we think about the impact that inclusion can have on the organization overall, but even reputation, even people's mental health and burnout, etc., it should be as high a priority for you as an individual and your organization as compliance and health and safety and all those things.
Yeah, exactly. And, that's why, and I'm sure you've heard it as well, this backlash on DEI, call it whatever you want, whatever people land on. Some people have lent into inclusion. Some people are talking about culture now. Some people have calling it opportunity. Whatever you call it, this is about decision making. This is about choices. This is about how you drive a team to thrive. This is about high performing cultures. So, yeah, it's just sometimes I think we're still having conversations about inclusion that feels very surface level. When people ask me, oh, well, how are we going to make change? I'm like, well, let's go into the system. The systems actually can do more for change than any one individual, because there's something that I say often, which is you can teach your business about race every single day. Great. If your system still says that they need a 2-1 from a Russell Group University, then no matter how much you teach people about race, there's still going to be people that are not going to get into your organization, isn't it? It has to be embedded in the system. And I don't know whether, is there a best practice? I don't know. We're coming to the end now. I wonder if there's one thing you would like to leave leaders with on this call about inclusive leadership. What would it be?
I think I'd just invite you to just pick an area of your business that you want to interrogate for inclusion, and just spend some time really dissecting that and seeing where there might be issues that need to be addressed, and just start from there. Don't try and fix all of it at once, because you will just give up. Start somewhere small and be really focused with it.
Yeah, love that. Because again, Yeah, absolutely, because trying to look at the whole thing feels scary, and leaders then shy away from it. You know, no one wants to try and you can't change the whole business. Like, one person described inclusion as a tanker to me before. It's a huge tanker. So actually, instead of trying to move the whole tanker, how do you move it in sections? And so I love that idea of choose one part of the business. You could choose the ERGs. I've started to have a different mindset about that lately, because I think if you center your whole inclusion strategy around your ERGs, I think that's wrong. I don't think that's the right answer either. I think actually what I'm trying to encourage leaders to do now is actually move away from the ERGs for a moment and get your house in order. What is the business strategy? What's the business direction? Where do you want to go? And then the ERGs will help you get there, as opposed to trying to center all your inclusion efforts around the ERGs, because actually that is not strategic change. That is not cultural transformation. So Grace, thank you so much. I really appreciate you and your patience, because it is summer holidays. Let me be transparent. I've had children coming in here several times in this life, but I appreciate you. I appreciate the work you do, and I'm really grateful that you are on the faculty. You know, we've got really big ambitions, and one of them is to really drive this change at an exec and leadership level. And so it's great to have your perspective on what that should look like, what that could look like. And it's great to see Damilola on the line. Bernadette, thank you so much for joining. And so, yeah, and you know, as we start to continue, well, not even start, as we continue on this journey, because like people like us, this is our lives. This is what we do every single day, right? Like,
literally,
we're at it every single day, beating the drum. And so these conversations are really important, because sometimes we get people that say, oh my God, I listened to your live and it, you know, taking that back to my business. And that's ultimately what we want. So if you're listening and you want to talk something out, reach out to us, please. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to talk this through with you. Grace, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you joining and giving your perspective. And so thank you to everyone else who joined. Awesome.
Bye.